and welcome to Trying Times. My name's Carmen. If you're new here, welcome. I hope you're having such a good day. As I'm recording this right now, it is like Saturday afternoon. It's a long weekend. I'm enjoying my time. I'm enjoying my day. It was a little bit gloomy and gross out, but now the sun has come out, so I think that's a good omen as I start recording. I'm going to take it as a good sign. I will be honest here and preface with the fact that this episode might be a little bit, I don't want to say depressy in subject matter, but it might be a little bit more serious in some nature. But I find a lot of the episodes that I've been recording this year have been a little bit more serious in subject matter or a little bit more serious in how people connect to them, as opposed to talking about things that I genuinely enjoy, like movies or books or music. These subjects are a little bit more hard hitting, and I find something that people might be able to relate to a little bit more because I know I can relate to them. I've talked to friends about a lot of these things before, and so I figured it'd be great to be able to record episodes focused on some more of that kind of subject matter. So I'll be honest when I say the subject I want to talk about today is the idea of navigating loneliness versus enjoying solitude. And what the heck does that mean? Well, let's get into it. Loneliness and solitude, I find, are two experiences almost everyone moves through, but at very different paces, at very different moments in life. And the one collective thing that we all have in common is that very few people, or very few people that we might come across in life, talk about this in a very honest manner and don't really hold back and don't find themselves shying away from the subject of talking about this or wanting to talk about this. And I find that really interesting. And I will say, for me, when I notice this at most, when it comes and goes in waves, because sometimes it comes in waves and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you adjust and you learn, and it's a weird, ever-changing thing, I think, that happens throughout adulthood. It could happen during adolescence as well, for sure, but I think maybe in your adult years, especially in the formative early adult years, it's something that you're dealt with and you learn as you go. So I will say, I find that there's this quiet shift that happens in adulthood where being alone stops feeling like a temporary moment and it starts to feel like it's part of your real everyday life. And with that shift can come a lot of emotions, without a doubt, because it can be very tough to process, to ideate, to understand as it's happening. All of the things, really. I think a lot of these emotions can be, in part, heavy. They can certainly be confusing. And I think, on the other hand, some of them can surely be very grounding. And through all of those waves and all of those emotions is really how we learn, or so I like to think that's how we learn. But yeah, in a nutshell, in this episode, I really want to talk about the difference between being lonely or feeling lonely and actually enjoying your own company, and why learning that difference can change the way that you see yourself. It can change the way that you see your life and all the above, really. And also learning that none of it is a bad thing, and learning that none of that means you're doing something wrong or that maybe you're not doing something that you should be doing. It just means that you're moving at your own pace. And that, honestly, as an adult, in whatever capacity that may be in, is the right and only thing you can do. I think you can only learn by doing. And so this is a great way to start that. But yeah, I will start by saying, with my research, I always like to share a statistic or a scientific fact of sorts. So I will start by saying that research shows that young adults in their late 20s to early 30s, so again, still very formative years as an adult, report some of the highest levels of loneliness, even more than older age groups. And I find this to be so interesting for a number of reasons. Psychologists note specifically, and this is a big thing that I thought about when I read about this, was that this stage of life in particular often comes with a massive restructuring of social circles. That can include things like people moving away, friendships maybe starting to shift or fall apart, or, I don't know, lose the same essence that they once had in some way. There's a change in routine, and all of these things in such can create an emotional gap that feels bigger than what we might expect to feel or what we could ever even expect as a whole. Studies also show that solitude, when chosen, actually helps to regulate stress levels and boost creativity. But on the other hand, loneliness, which is just unwanted isolation, activates the same part of the brain that can be associated with physical pain. So again, that's such a great way to differentiate the two there. When you're choosing to have that moment of solitude, it can activate so many wonderful things for you. But when you're in loneliness of any form, and it's this sort of unwanted isolation or unexpected isolation, that can trigger so many more things that are painful, that can cause you to trip up in a number of ways, that can halt maybe, a process of feeling good about yourself or a process of healing. It might be triggering. In fact, it could be a number of things that would prevent you to feel the best that you should be feeling or that you could be feeling. And so the line between the two isn't just emotional in this way. It's actually biological because it changes the way that you're feeling in a physical sense, the way that you're feeling mentally, the way that you're feeling emotionally, the way that you might even be feeling physically, because all of those things really are intertwined with one another. And I think that in itself is such a telling fact to being in, I don't know, this stage of, I guess, loneliness versus understanding solitude and understanding that it is a normal thing and learning to enjoy it almost. To speak a little bit more to this in my own personal experience, I will say I've had phases where I think being alone felt very empowering, like I could finally hear myself think or reconnect with parts of me that I forgot about. And then I've had days where maybe the quiet has felt certainly a little too loud, where I didn't know what to do with myself. And at the same time, that feeling can also get very overwhelming, almost just as overwhelming as being in a room full of people and there just being too much noise. On the other hand, sometimes being in too much quiet can also be overwhelming. And again, this is very different from person to person, but in my experience, that's how I've experienced it a little bit so far. And I'd like to add in here, I have felt throughout my life so fortunate, and especially now, to have a support system around me of loved ones who are just literally the best. So I'm never inherently ever alone. No matter where I am in the world, I'm never alone. And that is such a special thing to be able to have and to acknowledge and to understand. And as a human, I think it makes sense that I have moments where, despite all of that, I might feel lonely anyways, because I'm a human with a variety of feelings and a brain that likes to scan everything all the time, as other humans' brains do. And I think that that's something that just comes up. So, what I've learned is that usually for me, loneliness shows up when I'm disconnected from myself and not just from people. If I'm not taking the time in the matter of a transitional period, when I'm busy, or maybe when things are the opposite and they're not busy, if I'm not taking the time to like sit with myself and process anything, then a lot of the time loneliness can show up. And that's kind of interesting. And when I say sit down to process anything, that could be a number of things. That could be to sit down and journal, taking the route of self-care, sit down and journal, meditate, go to therapy. It could be the route of self-care physically, whether that's getting myself up and moving, being around people in a class of some sort to learn something new. It could be the route of maybe a little bit more emotional, indulging in things that I enjoy, whether that's hobbies, that could also be engaging mentally, and just doing things that I enjoy and doing things that help me stay connected to myself. If I'm not taking time to do those things, it's very easy to become disconnected, not only for me, but I think for many people. And so I feel like it's so easy to lose that if you're not paying attention to that. And it feels honestly a little bit like waiting for someone or something else to fill a space that I haven't learned to hold. And that has been a lifelong process of understanding what I might need or what that could look like for me. And certainly in conversations with friends, it seems like a common thing in your mid to late 20s of really trying to practice that and understand it and learn what that looks like for you. And so much of this, again, ties back to learning what your needs are or what they might be. And I think it's just so important to practice learning that and then making the time to instill those things, whatever they might be, and notice that shift. Notice if you feel better. Notice maybe if it doesn't help you feel better, and then go from there. On the other hand, I will say solitude feels very different. It feels like choosing myself on purpose by, again, doing things that help me feel good. So on the other hand, loneliness usually shows up when I'm disconnected from myself. Maybe I'm not making the effort to do those things. Solitude for me comes in when I'm choosing myself on purpose and doing things I enjoy, like reading or going for a slow walk or enjoying my company without needing a distraction of any sort. But the truth is, the first time these two experiences collide ever in your life, it can be very confusing, especially in adulthood when everyone is suddenly living at a different pace and maybe even at a different place physically. We're all at different parts of our lives at different moments that might be fleeting. It might be something that's just, a fresh start for someone. It might be something that's transitional for somebody. It might be the end of something for somebody. It's all very different and all happening at once. And I think it can feel like a lot. For instance, some people might be married, some might be traveling, some are starting families, some are rebuilding from scratch. It's meant to be an ever changing period of time because everybody's meant to grow on their own timeline and at their own pace. So it's very easy to have those two experiences collide where maybe you feel that tinge of loneliness, but maybe you might be enjoying that solitude, and there's really no in between. You're allowed to feel both those at the same time. Again, it's the first time in life where we're not all on the same timeline, and that can make the loneliness feel sharper or solitude feel more necessary. And learning to distinguish what that might look like for you or what you might need or what you might be experiencing more is very much a personal thing. It's very much a one off thing where you have to learn what that might look like for you, or you have to understand what that might mean to you or what things might be triggering either of the two for you. When I think about triggering in this sense, I would think what's triggering loneliness for you, maybe more than what's triggering solitude. But on the other hand, it's always good to step back and think, is something triggering solitude right now? For instance, I brought up this moment of a lot of transition at this point in time or in your early adulthood years where everyone's at a different pace. With that, things like your circle of people, or maybe even a few people in particular that you thought were always going to be in your life, might shift. That might start to look different. And while that can be very scary, it is inherently not a bad thing by any means because it's something that's meant to happen. I will say, sometimes in those instances, it could feel like forced solitude. Later on in time, if with acceptance, it might be able to, through processing, be understood as loneliness. But when things are happening, depending on the type of person you are, you might not be like really pushy or, you might be very accepting of just, okay, this is what it is, and I'm not going to push further. So solitude it is. And that's not a bad thing. But yeah, you might be able to experience a lot of those feelings at once. And there's really no right or wrong way of going about that or the way that you might notice these things happening. There's no right or wrong way. I think that that's the most confusing part about adulthood is just it's all over the place and it's never meant to feel like one thing all the time. It's actually not meant to feel like one thing most of the time. And I'll say for myself, that's probably been the most confusing thing. It's, I think, very common for things to start feeling good and stable for very short periods of time. And then there's usually some sort of a lesson that needs to happen. And through that, change. Again, not stable for very long. And that's not a bad thing by any means. But I say that all to say, sometimes those feelings of loneliness might get triggered by something that you didn't expect. And then at the same time, solitude might be triggered by something that you never could have expected either. But both of those things I think are very necessary to feel. While they might not be the most fun all the time, solitude I think you can grow to enjoy, but at first it might not feel the best. And it could come up in so many different forms. It could come up in your personal life, it could come up in your career, it could come up elsewhere. And that's fine. It's just something that you're meant to learn from at some point in time, or so I believe. And that makes me feel better about it. But it is very important. And I think I talked about this in the previous episode, which you should check out, by the way. But learning how to sit with myself, I think even on the days it's felt probably the most uncomfortable, has been one of the most grounding parts of growing up. And when I say it has been, I don't mean that it's done because by no means is that ever done. I think I'm very much in the thick of those formative years and times and learning lessons now. And also in the thick of those trying times. That was very cringy. But yeah, I think I'm still in the midst of learning so much. If anything, I'm in the very beginning of learning so much. And yeah, that's what I wanted a lot of this episode and the episode prior to this to feel like when it comes to growing up in adulthood, because there's so much to take in. And I think a lot of the time we're scared to admit that we might be feeling a certain way because it might not be relatable. It might not be the most glamorous thing. It might not be fun. It might not be the best thing that everybody wants to hear all the time. But yeah, if you're feeling a little out of sorts and maybe you're feeling lonely, or maybe you're feeling like you're enjoying your own company more than you ever have. Neither of those is a wrong feeling to have. In fact, you're learning, and you're learning about yourself and growing from it. And that's incredible. I think that is probably the most successful thing that you can do as an adult at any phase of adulthood. So you're winning. Okay, I want to share a little bit about some audience participation here. I actually went to Instagram, and which, if you haven't yet, check out the Trying Times podcast on Instagram at the Trying Times podcast. And occasionally I will go ahead and add a question to the story that I would love to get your response to, and I can feature that in an episode. On the other hand, if you'd love to share some insight to a few different prompts, you can go ahead and check out the link in bio on Instagram, and there's a form there that you can go fill out and respond to. There's a bunch of questions in there, and your response will most likely get featured in a future episode, so go ahead and do that. But I went ahead and asked, how do you tell loneliness from solitude? And I received a bunch of really great responses. The first one being watching endless messy YouTube videos. Again, I think this could be construed in a number of ways. Maybe you find yourself watching more YouTube videos than ever when you're feeling lonely. Or maybe you enjoy your solitude and that's one of the things you look forward to the most. But I think that that's a great one. Somebody said, solitude, the state of introspection and peace, loneliness, meaning isolation, sadness, and life is moving around you. And I think that's honestly put in the most straightforward, clean-cut way I've ever read. And I really appreciate that response. Somebody said yearning. And I think that that is very true, because maybe you experience that more when you're feeling that bout of loneliness rather than feeling solitude. Maybe you're yearning for company, maybe you're yearning for community or connection or something of that sort. And that honestly makes total sense to me. Somebody else said, solitude as a choice brings you peace, whereas loneliness is a gap in your need to connect. Again, such a good way to define it, because it is really that longing for community and wanting people around you or wanting that connection. And again, as humans, that's so necessary. And then the last response I got was, it's all about how you see yourself in the silence. And that is such a great way to round up that audience participation, because truly there's a number of ways of going about it. And I think as you're experiencing this throughout life and throughout your adulthood, you're going to feel all kinds of ways about this. Loneliness can come in a number of ways. One of those might be self-blame. It could be a lot of looking at yourself and, again, that introspection of, hey, maybe this is not good, maybe this is bad. On the other hand, introspection, as someone mentioned, is a really heavy part of solitude as well, where you're understanding yourself better through your own lens. I think introspection through loneliness can be trying to understand yourself through the lens of somebody else. And that's never clear. It's never helpful. It's always foggy. In fact, a therapist years ago told me that if you spend your life trying to understand yourself through the lens of other people, like a camera lens, for instance, it's never going to be clear and it's never going to be precise to what you might actually be feeling, because you're always going to be looking at that through the projection of somebody else's camera lens, and you don't know where the lens has been or what the lens has seen or what the lens has gone through. So it's always going to be a little bit foggy. Maybe there's going to be a mark on that lens. It's never going to look the way that you are actually meant to see yourself, because you're seeing yourself through someone that has been on the journey of their own experiences or has experienced so many of their own things. So that's not fair to you. And I thought that that was a really interesting way to look at that. So I wanted to round that up and then share a little bit of what I found through Reddit as well. I saw a post where someone wrote, loneliness is wanting company. Solitude is enjoying who you've become. I felt like that kind of related to what I just said a little bit too, of instead of seeking that validation or that justification or that acceptance outwards, it's really accepting it inwards and looking at yourself inwardly, which is very necessary. Another person shared how their favorite ritual is taking themselves out for coffee because it reminds them that being alone doesn't mean being without love. Sometimes you're just learning how to give it to yourself. If I could drop this mic and it wouldn't hurt your ears, I would, because that's a very important fact. I also, too, really love taking myself to cafes. And I've started to learn that, honestly, yeah, being alone does not at all mean being without love. Does not mean being without care. Does not mean being without company. If you really start to enjoy and feel fulfillment in those things within yourself, there's nothing wrong with that at all. It's great. And sometimes you're learning to just give it to yourself. I have been learning how to do that, honestly, through that process. And I think it's wonderful. Others talked about how adulthood forced them to redefine what connection looks like, and that it's normal for friendships and social patterns to shift as you grow. And again, as I just shared a little bit earlier, sometimes that means your social circle might get smaller. Sometimes people that you have known for so many years might shift out of your life. Maybe things start to drift. Maybe things start to kind of go a little bit quieter. That's not necessarily a point of failure, nor is that a point of anything being wrong or, things maybe ending or like the world ending, because sometimes things are meant to come to a close, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing at all. Another thing I want to share just before I wrap this episode up is just that I think all of this to say, to sum it all up neatly, this is a reminder that everyone is navigating this space between loneliness and solitude in their own way, even if no one is saying it out loud. And that, I think, is a very powerful reminder. I will leave you with that, okay? Thank you so much for listening to this and for being here and being supportive. I appreciate you taking out the time. If you have any thoughts, questions, anything at all about this topic or this episode, please reach out to me at the Trying Times Podcast on Instagram. I would love to talk. And I think this subject is one that's so heavy and you can really dig into it in a number of ways from so many different angles. So feel free to reach out. I would love to chat. And yeah, thank you so much. I hope we chat again soon, okay? Bye.